Hey there, Javalock here. And I wanted to take this time to answer one of those questions that I think we've all had when we were first playing Dungeons and Dragons, and a question that we hear often from people who are interested but just don't really know how to get their feet wet in the game. And that is, what class should I pick? Now, of course, the real answer to this question is just, well, what do you want to do? What do you want your character to do? How do you figure out your character in the game world? All sorts of expansive, nuanced questions that really can't be definitively answered. But of course, I'm not here to just tell you, oh, it's just whatever you want. I took some time to think about this, and I wanted to really formulate a direct answer. Now, of course, this isn't law. You can really pick whatever class you want, as long as you're having fun, that's all that matters. But I thought that I would take this time to really break down a class that I think is beginner friendly, and a class that I really think is just fantastic overall. Okay, so perhaps your friends have been talking you into playing the game forever and ever. You finally decided this is going to be your time to do it. Perhaps curiosity's finally gotten the best of you, and you find a game that's starting soon. And you say to yourself, I'm going to play D&D for the first time. Which class should I pick? And if you were to ask me, Javalock, which class is the most beginner friendly? I would tell you to pick a cleric. And there's a lot of reasons why I would say pick a cleric. First off, the cleric has a lot of healing abilities, which is always useful. I don't know many campaigns that would shy away from having a dedicated healer. So after hearing that, you might just be thinking, okay, I'm a healer, but that's kind of not really what I wanted to do. I don't know if I want to be locked into that role. Can I pick something else? And that's really where the beauty of the 5th edition cleric comes from. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, they've put in so much work to make a cleric just more than a simple healer. But instead of me just saying that and asking you to take it as a fact, I want to really show you why I think the cleric is one of the best beginner classes, and why it's just a strong class overall. So let's talk about stats. As you know, whenever you create a D&D character, you have your stat attributes. And these attributes basically dictate how your character functions in the game world. Now, one of the great things about the cleric class is that it's actually really hard stat-wise to build a bad cleric. Now, typically, you can say that all classes have what's called a primary stat, and we'll go into greater details in another conversation on what a primary stat is. But basically, it's the stat that gives your character the most benefit based on its class features. And to a degree, spellcasting classes have this kind of lockdown. Even as a cleric, your wisdom stat would be considered your primary stat, because the higher this stat is, the more spells you're going to be able to remember, the harder your spells are going to hit, and the harder it's going to be to break your spells. Also, some of your class features will change depending on your primary stat, so it's important to make sure that that one's well taken care of. And again, that's really the short version of what a primary stat is. It's just a stat that further optimizes a lot of your other class features. Now, the good thing about a cleric is that you can build a cleric in so many different ways, where after you really take care of your primary stat, which is wisdom, you're able to really mold that cleric into whatever you want it to be. You can really put the rest of your stats in anywhere that you feel fit. You can put it into your strength, your dexterity, your constitution, even your charisma. Now, I know that might sound like we're breaking some optimization rules, and that's really okay, especially if this is your first character, and if you don't truly care about optimizing the character. So in that sense, I think a cleric is a really hard class to build wrong. Just focus on wisdom as your primary stat, meaning this is going to be your highest stat, and then all your other stats you can really just put wherever you feel it fits your character best. Okay, so let's go back to what you want your character to do. We have this cleric, we know where to put his stats, so let's just say you don't really want to be a dedicated healer. You want to cast some powerful magic too. Or maybe you want to be more of a frontline person? Well, that's where the domains come in handy. So all classes have subclasses, and those just kind of further diversify what your character can do and the abilities that they have going forward. So clerics have what's called a domain, and domains are great because on one hand, they give you a taste of what all the other classes are able to do. There's the domain of nature that gives you very druid-like features. There's also the domain of war, which gives you more offensive frontline capabilities. And there's many more. You can use these domains to really showcase what you want your characters to do and the roles that they want to play in the party. If you do want to be a dedicated healer, you can be a cleric of the life domain, and your healing ability will be off the charts. If you're in a party that only has one physical lead, and you want to kind of help mitigate some of that responsibility from that person, you can pick the war domain, and you could make yourself a cleric who's also well suited to be on the front line. There's tons of domains to really further diversify what your cleric can do, which is great for any kind of player, but especially great for first-time players or beginners who are just getting their feet wet with the game. Essentially, it's almost like you're playing two different classes. You're just getting the light version of one and then the brunt version of another. And the last thing I want to talk about is spellcasting. So I know some players, especially new players, are really intimidated by spellcasting, and I don't blame them. But I think the cleric class does a really good job of making spellcasting easy to understand and easy to organize. First off, clerics have what are called prepared spells, meaning that they have a wide list of spells that they can learn, and they get a chance to keep or change out those spells every day. In game, it's called a long rest. And what that means is that as a new player, you can pick a certain group of spells, and maybe during that day's adventure, you figure out you really like this spell, but this spell wasn't really great. Unlike some classes, you're not really stuck with that spell. You can change it out. Now, of course, there's restrictions. You can't change it out on the fly. But again, I think it really helps new players to know that they're not stuck with the decision that they made, not really understanding how the spells or the mechanics work. Or even if they're just curious about all the different kinds of spells that a cleric can learn, they have the option to really explore their spells. Further, depending on your domain, you have a set sample of spells that are more tailored to the ideas of that domain, but don't count against you in terms of the amount of spells that you can prepare each day. And I think this really just helps the playability of the class. I mean, you're always going to have spells that are at least supposed to fit thematically in your domain. And even if they don't, even if you don't like them, they don't really count against you in any way. They're just spells that you can have and you can cast them if you want. Okay, so wrapping this up. If you were to ask me, Javalock, I want to play D&D, but I don't know which class to play, I would say the Cleric class. And this is why. The Cleric class is really beginner friendly in terms of stat allocations. Again, you want to make sure your highest is in your primary stat, which is Wisdom, but after that, you're really just putting your stats wherever you think they'll fit your character best. Second, I think the domains give players an excellent chance to not only diversify their character role, but also to sample other classes. And not only can that be really helpful in terms of the class that you play next time, it also makes you stand out in your party. As a cleric, you're always going to have the option to heal people, but your domains give you an opportunity to also define yourself within party roles. And finally, spellcasting can be very daunting, but the setup for how clerics can cast and learn spells is very approachable and easy to understand. And those are my reasons why I think the cleric is the best beginner class. Of course, this is my opinion, and I would love for the conversation to continue. So if you guys have any more points that you want to bring up, whether they support my idea as the cleric being the best class, feel free to let me know in the comments below. As always, I'm Javalock. Thanks for having this conversation with me, and I can't wait to talk to you next time. Stay functional, guys, and safe.